Brian Thomas Jr. is the biggest ADP riser in the month of November, but should you still be buying him? We'll discuss that and more on this episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Madjuk. You can follow her on Twitter at Kate Madjuk. And it's a Wednesday show. So, of course, that means Matt Williamson is here. Check him out on Twitter at WilliamsonNFL. On today's show, we're going to take a look at some of the biggest risers and fallers in our latest batch of ADP, courtesy of Dynasty League Football. And Matt, I want to start with Brian Thomas Jr., who has seen a massive rise in his value. He is being drafted as wide receiver 8 right now in Dynasty Leagues. Overall, player 10, just behind Bijan Robinson, just ahead of Brock Bowers and Nico Collins. Is wide receiver 8 too rich for Brian Thomas already?
I think we just got to go straight to Kate on this one. I mean, I think she's losing her mind over there. Usually you guys set me up, but I have lots to say. But Kate, I got to hear your thoughts on this one. I love the reaction.
I mean, I'm kind of floored. I'm going to be honest. I foresaw in my giant, what's it called? The ball. What's a ball called? The ball.
Sphere?
No, like the Miss Cleo ball.
Your crystal ball?
My crystal ball. Thank you.
There you go.
Crystal ball's a little cloudy this morning. I first saw in my crystal ball a big rise for Brian Thomas Jr., but given the strength of this draft class, given the number of elite assets we already have at the top of our dynasty rankings, I definitely didn't see wide receiver 8 in the cards. No. Matt.
No, I didn't either.
I'm speechless.
So to pull back the curtain, I like to do this on podcasts. Marcus said, "Do you want me to tell you where these ADPs are?" I'm like, "No, spring us on it live. Spring it on me live," because I figured I was going to come in here and say, I'm a Trevor Lawrence fan. I know he's hard to get behind right now, but I'm still in his corner. I don't think this is a terrible situation. I love Thomas coming out. He's even better than I thought. He's not just a size speed guy. He's got more in his bag than that. And Jacksonville could get Belichick or Vrabel. And sure, I'll take Brian Thomas at wide receiver 18. Not in the first round sounds insanity to me.
So, Matt, there is a bigger gap in terms of ADP between Brian Thomas Jr. and Puka Nacua than there is Brian Thomas and Marvin Harrison Jr. And in fact, we've had multiple trades over the last week where those two have been swapped straight up for one another. What do you think about that?
Thomas for Harrison, you're saying?
Straight up. Yep.
I understand it, but I need a second round pick in there too if I'm going to move Harrison. I think they're close. I mean, I really do. I mean, so
they're close enough, but I mean,
close enough.
Guys, come on. Like, I genuinely think like this is something that I always say for being the group of analysts and fanalists and fantasy managers that pride themselves on their long-term outlook of players while playing the game of Dynasty. This is one of the most reactive bunch of minions that I've ever seen in my life. I'm sorry. I obviously kind of biased. I loved Marvin Harrison Jr., who was my clear-cut wide receiver 1 in this class. And Brian Thomas wasn't even particularly in the same zip code, let alone the Tri-County area of the top 3 wide receivers. He's defied my expectations in a big way because I was skeptical that he was going to be able to be anything more than this kind of size speed mismatch. Like, is he going to have the finesse? Is he going to have the route tree? Like, he's surpassed my expectations. But there's no doubt that, like, despite the fact that Brian Thomas Jr. has had some flashier production, Marvin Harrison Jr. is the better, more polished wide receiver. And, we've seen, I think, even since, the early days that, the Cardinals offense is working to get Marvin Harrison Jr. some different looks, right? And utilize him as less of the sacrificial X receiver and move him around the formation, create some size, athleticism mismatches there. Like, Marvin Harrison Jr. is a better wide receiver, and he's in a much better situation, with a much better quarterback, a much better organization overall. How is this even close?
So yeah, like I can't take Thomas over St. Brown, Nico, Drake London, Garrett Wilson, and he's probably still fourth among rookies, let alone Jefferson and Lamb and Chase and the guys at the top.
So just to be clear, these are some of the receivers that are being drafted behind Brian Thomas Jr. on Dynasty League Football. Nico Collins, Puka Nacua, Garrett Wilson, Drake London, Chris Olave, Rashee Rice. Like, he is comfortably, and there's a big gap. Like, you look at the overall ADP, he is comfortably ahead of all those guys. Matt, one of the things that's fascinating to me is that if you look at Marvin Harrison Jr. and Brian Thomas, both those guys have established quarterbacks. Obviously, Trevor Lawrence is hurt right now.
Mm-hmm.
They're being drafted with their ADPs around 8, 9. Malik Neighbors, who is another fantastic prospect, his overall ADP, not his wide receiver ADP, but his overall ADP is 3.75 in startup drafts. So you're having to spend a top 4 pick on Malik Neighbors. Do you agree with drafters right now that there is a significant gap between Malik Neighbors and every other rookie receiver?
Not that big a gap. He would still be my one. A couple things I want to comment on. I would definitely take Thomas over Olave, Rice, and Nacua. Those are guys you said he's going ahead of. Correct. I mean, Olave's concussion, Rice's suspension / off the field. And I just don't think Nacua is a great talent. I think he's a good talent, not a great talent. And how long Stafford going to be there? I also think Harrison is clearly in a better situation than Thomas. And they're both probably in better situations than Neighbors.
That's the point, right?
The Giants are a tire fire.
Yeah, we got Tommy Cutlets throwing him the ball. I think that's the thing that was most interesting to me is that I love Malik Neighbors' talent. Yeah. I do. But for him to be 5 to 6 spots ahead of those guys is fascinating, considering the quarterback turmoil they have now. Maybe drafters are believing that the Giants are going to find their quarterback in next year's draft or in free agency, but I just don't see it yet, Matt. Like, I need to know who that guy is before I have that significant
the savior that they're going to get in the draft or free agency. That's like,
right.
Dak Prescott.
What's the best case scenario?
Oh, I mean, Shadur Sanders headed to the Dallas Cowboys. I guess they're going to have to unload their quarterback.
This is a Locked On Cowboys show, not a Locked On Dynasty show, apparently.
So I haven't checked in a while, but I would assume Chase and Jefferson are still the top 2. And if they're not, I don't understand it.
Well, it's Jefferson 1, CD 2, Chase 3.
Okay, I was going to ask, is Lamb or St. Brown going behind?
No, it's Jefferson, Lamb, Chase, Neighbors, and then there's a big gap in terms of the ADP down to Amon-Ra, St. Brown, AJ Brown.
I would rather have St. Brown, and I'd rather have Nico too than any rookie.
And maybe that's the actionable advice here. Nico Collins being drafted as wide receiver 9, wide receiver 10. It sounds like, Matt, to you, that's still a massive value. Kate, would you agree?
Massive value.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think the whole takeaway of this Brian Thomas Jr. discussion is that Nico Collins is underrated. Go buy.
There you go.
Yeah. Flip any of those rookies for Nico and take a little profit, right?
I would as well. Let's talk about some running backs. Let's go with Tyrone Tracy. Let's go back to the Giants because he has seen his ADP rise more than any other running back. We'll get to his value next. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in award winnings, PrizePicks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long on PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the best way to get action on sports in most states, including California, Florida, Georgia, and Texas. It's also the only real money daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Download the PrizePicks app today. Use promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the app today. Use promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. This episode is brought to you by Pre-Alcohol by Zbiotics. Pre-Alcohol Probiotic Drink by Zbiotics is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink alcohol, it gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct and not dehydration that's to blame for your rough next day. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just remember to make Zbiotics your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly, and you'll feel fantastic tomorrow. Again, here's the steps. Step 1, drink pre-alcohol. For best results, make pre-alcohol your first drink of the night. Step 2, drink responsibly. Pace yourself, hydrate, and get a good night's sleep. Step 3, enjoy tomorrow. Wake up feeling refreshed and ready to take on the day. Go to zbiotics.com/LockedOnNFL to learn more and get 15% off your first order when you use LockedOnNFL at checkout. Zbiotics is backed with a 100% money-back guarantee. So if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money tomorrow. No questions asked. Remember to head to zbiotics.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL at checkout for 15% off. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We are discussing some of the biggest ADP risers and fallers. And Matt, let's talk about Tyrone Tracy, who has seen his ADP go from 134 to 63. Right now, he is being drafted as a top 15 running back, RB 13 overall. Too high, too low, just right.
Just right or too low. And
not too high.
Not too high. Now, I have to take a step back after this NFL season because I am an absolute running back ageist. You know, I dumped Kamara and Mixon and guys that are tearing it up right now. I could throw Henry in there, Saquon, Jacobs. We'll see about McCaffrey. But that era of running backs is really holding up better than history has told us, that dreaded age 27 cliff. So I am very much an ageist at running back. I always dump those guys for future picks. And 2-3 years in, I usually recycle my running backs over and over. So Jacobs or Tracy being this young without that much wear and tear at the college level is extremely attractive to me. I still think he has massive untapped potential as a former wide receiver in the passing game at the NFL level. Yes, the Giants are a tire fire, though, but they have so many other needs. I can't imagine them going to get competition for him. You know, he's going to be the guy. And I look around the Dynasty running back landscape, and I would have him over like Pacheco or Benson or Brooks or Chase Brown or ATN.
And by the way, all those guys are being drafted behind him right now.
Okay.
I was going to mention Travis Etienne. Nobody saw their dynasty stock fall further than Travis Etienne, who was a top 8 running back going into last month. He's all the way down to running back 24, 25 right now. So you're right. The names that are the closest to Tracy right now are DeAndre Swift, who's being drafted one spot ahead of him, and then Joe Mixon, who's directly behind him. And honestly, I would just rather have Tracy than both those guys.
Same. I mean, if I'm making a stretch run, Mixon has really blown me away with how good he looks. If I needed to win this year, I would swap them because I think Tracy's not going to give us a lot of fantasy points the rest of the season because Tommy Cutlets is his quarterback, you know. But
maybe he will.
Maybe they'll dump it to him. Yeah, maybe they'll dump it to him a lot.
Kate, how do you feel about Tyrone Tracy being a top 14 running back right now?
It feels rich, but I think I'm also kind of hung up on some of the surprising values that I think are being drafted behind him. Like David Montgomery, I know he's 27 years old. I know he has way more miles on the tires, but he is tied to an organization that wants to run the crap out of the football. And it feels like he's kind of the face of their run game. I know they have Jahmyr Gibbs, a much flashier, more intriguing running back for fantasy managers because of his explosive playmaking ability. But like David Montgomery feels like he's kind of the heartbeat of this Detroit Lions offense. And I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. So like I'm looking at David Montgomery, RB 18, just feels so much safer with just as much weekly upside. Like David Montgomery can give you top 12 production any given week, and the floor is quite safe. Or, I mean, I'm still even looking at like Jonathan Brooks, RB 21. I know there are concerns, but I also think he's a 21-year-old former second round pick who, yeah, like, you know, we saw them give a long-term extension to Chuba Hubbard, but like, if they want to build this offense around the run game, like maybe that's not as big a hit for Jonathan Brooks, who I think does win out in the talent competition between him and Chuba Hubbard. Like there are a lot of intriguing values. Trey Benson, for example, RB 34, I think is absolutely crazy. He's looked good here in the second half of the season. The Cardinals have been looking to get him more touches, and he has an immediate pathway to production paired with a, you know, pretty solid, you know, draft capital, draft profile. Like, I think I'm less hung up on Tyrone Tracy than I am just the value of the guys behind him in this batch of ADP.
So I wanted to ask you guys both. Let's say you've made the decision that you want to go out and get Tyrone Tracy. One of the things that I've seen on Dynasty League football is that there's been no trades of Tyrone Tracy straight up for a 2025 first round pick. However, there have been like 5 or 6 trades for a second and third round pick. So, Matt, would you be willing to give up more than, let's say, a second and third to go get Tracy?
I think that's about fair. I mean, I'll plead some ignorance on this because I know that this is a great running back class coming up. I know the names. I've watched them casually. I just haven't studied them. But I think I would rather take my chances on next year's crop of running back at 108 than Tracy. So that, and not let alone the receivers or whatever. But if I gave you a 2 this year and a 2 the following year, okay. I just don't think I get ones involved.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to ask you. Like, if you have Tyrone Tracy and maybe you are a middling team, do you hold out for a 1? Because if I have Tracy, what's the benefit of me sending a, you know, pick 18 in a rookie draft for Tyrone Tracy, like sending that away? I would rather just have Tracy at that point.
I agree. Yes, 100% on that.
Which is probably why he's going to be hard to trade, right?
Yeah.
Because the manager that has him is going to want a first round pick. And if you don't have him, a first round pick feels a little rich in a draft that is so loaded with running back talent. I just bet we don't see a lot of moves regarding Tracy or involving Tracy over the next month. Kate, I want your thoughts. What would
I wonder
you
what
do?
receiver you swap him for that people would be happy on both ends. Like better than Cedric Tillman.
Yeah, better than Tillman.
Obviously not Thomas neighborhood. McConkey. I'm thinking about same age guys.
Yeah, I would rather have McConkey probably than Tracy.
I would.
What
too.
about, I'm looking at ADP right now. What about Jordan Addison? I know you're not a big Addison fan.
By far, Tracy. I don't.
Okay, what about Brendan Ayuk?
Fair.
Okay. Okay, what are your thoughts?
I think the tricky thing about the market for Tyrone Tracy right now is that, like, okay, so the people probably most willing to trade their first round picks right now are people who are contending. And I don't think that Tyrone Tracy is probably a guy that you're targeting if you're contending. I do like his upcoming schedule. It's not a terrible schedule, but just with questions about the offense, in general about their offensive production, Tommy DeVito is not the answer from a savior standpoint. He's not saving the season. He is an insurance protection for the Giants' financial future. Like, it's not like we're projecting the offense to get better with Tommy DeVito under center. So, like,
that's a flat out tank, right? I mean,
yeah,
that's a flat out tank.
That's fine to say. Like, good. I think that's the right move. But like, I think the sweet spot, like, so if you're a fantasy manager trying to trade for Tyrone Tracy, you're probably, I think, in more of a rebuild situation than you are in a win now. If you're in more of a rebuild situation, you have your own first round pick, probably going to be a relatively early one. So, like, do I want to give a top 6, top 8 pick for Tyrone Tracy, knowing that this is an intriguing draft class? Probably not. I just think, like, it's one of those things, like, there are some times where I want to move on from a player, and when I look at the roster construction of the teams in my league, I'm like, okay, well, there isn't a single trade that would make sense, when I'm looking at, a team's available draft capital or players they could set. And, like, there's sometimes not a great fit where you can move, a player either direction. And so I feel like Tyrone Tracy kind of envelops that perfectly for me. If you can get him in a startup, great. But I think the trade market for this player in particular seems really tricky for me right now.
I don't know. Rebuilding teams are going to dump him,
Exactly. Yeah.
How about this is a veteran podcast move? I'd prefer James Cook.
All right, how about that for a segment? We're going to talk about James Cook and his decreasing dynasty value. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by Hillsdale College. Time is our most precious commodity, so don't waste it scrolling through the same mind-numbing content for hours and hours. How can you spend it wisely to improve yourself? Our sponsor, Hillsdale College, is offering more than 40 free, that's right, free online courses, including Constitution 101, the meaning and history of the Constitution, Introduction to Free Market Economics, The Great American Story, A Land of Hope, The Rise and Fall of the Roman Republic, and so much more. I love taking these classes because I can just pop them on my phone when I'm doing my morning walk or when I'm sitting in the truck waiting for the pickup line at daycare. All of the Hillsdale courses are self-paced, so you can start whenever and wherever. Plus, you can go deeper with readings, quizzes, and discussions, or just kick back and enjoy the lectures. Go right now to hillsdale.edu/lockedon to enroll. There's no cost and it's easy to get started. That's hillsdale.edu/lockedon to register. hillsdale.edu/lockedon. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the new Locked On NFL show. 2 shows every single day. 1 in the morning with Tyler Rowland, 1 in the afternoon with Tony Wiggins for some real NFL talk. It's available wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube. All right, Matt, I want to ask you about James Cook, who saw a massive decrease in his dynasty value. Now, while he only dropped 2 spots from RB9 to RB11, when you look at the overall ADP, he's dropped 2 full rounds as a bunch of wide receivers and tight ends have passed him. Do you think he's still a value at RB11?
Do you think that's more of a case of those guys gaining steam? I know that Cook's value has dropped in a vacuum, but do you just think a lot of these young tight ends and receivers that have passed him just gained steam as opposed to him going backwards?
Probably. I mean, you had some guys like, I don't know, Jaden Reed, Roma Dunze, George Pickens, Zay Flowers, all those guys kind of just passed him. So probably.
Okay, I assume so. And there are some promising tight ends that I could see definitely taking ahead of them. Young guys.
A couple other receivers that passed him. Tank Dell, Keon Coleman, Jackson Smith, and Jigba, Xavier Worthy, all have passed him in ADP.
Some of those seem a little extreme, but I get it. I'm still a Cook believer. He's going to have a hard time finding the end zone. That's really my big problem with him is Josh Allen.
He is finding the end zone. So, like,
I know. We
know that touchdowns can be fluky, but he has 11 total touchdowns this year. 11. That's 11. Second among running backs.
Yeah. I mean, so I was fine with Tracy going where he is. I would take Cook ahead of him. So I guess that means I'm above market on him. And if he's falling, I think I'd throw some offers at him for sure. And the biggest reason, I mean, this isn't great analysis, but Josh Allen.
Yeah, the offense is just going to be good.
Josh Allen. You know, I mean, that's all I kind of need to know. He raises all ships.
The offense is just going to be so good, and he still has another year left on his deal. Ray Davis is obviously a good player, but I don't think we need to worry about him eating into a bunch of his workload. there was another running back that I wanted to ask you both about. Saquon Barkley is still being valued as RB5. But if you look at the ADP, he was being drafted around pick 11, pick 12. So at the end of the first round of your startup drafts, he's now out of the second round. And a bunch of these receivers, including Nico Collins, Puka Nacua, Garrett Wilson, Drake London, have all surpassed him. Do you think Barkley is now a value as a bottom of the end of round 2, top of round 3 startup pick?
Yes. I would never have used a late first in a startup on him, even if he was playing this well then. But him versus Nacua, to me, that's not even close. It's definitely Barkley. He's a special player.
Kate, how do you feel?
See, I probably have more concerns about that. If we're just talking like in a startup draft, in a vacuum, I'm probably a little bit more hesitant to put together a high-end draft capital for a player that I know is on the older side, probably due for some regression in terms of his overall efficiency, despite the fact that he's playing well with every opportunity he gets. It has a ton of touches on his tires, because you commit to Saquon Barkley with that early of a pick. You also need to commit to building a win now roster, right? And there's sometimes like when you're in a dynasty startup, you can construct a roster that you probably know could win a championship right now. But you also know, as you're building that roster, you're probably sacrificing some long-term value. And you might not be building a sustainable dynasty roster. And that's just not the way I like to start out my teams. Like, I think that specific draft move would require you to make a commitment that, you're going to have to make a very specific line of choices down the road that I just
Yeah, you're going to be committed to try to win right now, and the rest of your draft is having to be that way. So I get it.
I think we're looking at it the wrong way. Like, I think he's worth that price in a startup, but that doesn't mean I would pull the trigger, because that's just not my style build. But if I have a pretty good team right now, I'll give you my next year's first that might be 12th overall, might be 9th overall for him. I'll give you Puka Nacua for him. I'll give you the same value, but I don't think if I was starting up and I have nothing on my roster except the first round pick, that I would pull the trigger on Barkley.
All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty Football your first listen every single day. Make sure you check us out on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Follow Matt on Twitter at Williamson NFL. You can follow Kate on Twitter at Kate Majuk. I'm at Marcus _Mosier, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.